right, everybody. Welcome to Tova Talks for NAAW, National Accessibility Week 2021. Thank God we're all here. We're all okay. And we're going to chat about some very important things that are going on, especially from a federal government perspective. And I brought in an old friend of mine, Darren Ruck. Darren, thank you for coming today and joining me.
It's great to be here, Tova. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Well, I know you need reasons to get out of your kitchen like I do. So this was one of the ones, although we could have shot it while we cooked, I'd be just as happy. But anyway, Darren, start us off by telling everybody, because I know you, but they don't, a little bit about who you are and, frankly, what you're working on today.
Well, who I am? Well, I'm Darren Ruck. I've had the pleasure of working with the federal public service as well as private sector for many years in the human resource field. I've always had an affinity towards and a connection to diversity whenever having the opportunity, and professionally, I've done a lot of work in diversity and inclusion, both professionally as well as volunteer work. I've sat on several boards many years ago, an organization called Teamwork Cooperative, and as well as the DASK Industries. I'm chair of the board for several years. Always proud of the fact that we built a new building for DASK.
That's a lot.
And I remember looking over design plans, and it was just a dream that we had at the board of that time. So those are the kind of accomplishments that have meaning to me as a person, and the kind of work that I'm doing now actually has a lot of meaning. You know, we're trying to change the way that we think about diversity and inclusion, change the way we work towards it. And it's new for us, and it's scary at times as well. You know, government doesn't change quickly. You know, we're not known to be risk takers. In fact, you know, probably more on the risk averse side. And so creating that safe space to have those conversations that are needed, creating goals and plans that there's always a likelihood that you won't meet those targets, but you try again. So, you know, being prepared to fail is part of innovation, right? And so those are the messages that we're trying to send. We appreciate partnerships like what I know the Atlantic region is partnering right now with reachAbility. And that's really important to the work that we're doing across the country. So,
Darren, I want to bring it back to you because you're too modest, and that's why I'm here. I'm here to pull a little bit more out of you about you, Darren. You know, the reality is that there's a lot of talk, certainly today, and there wasn't necessarily when you were coming into the public service, about the importance of representation of diverse populations within the workplace of the government. Can you tell me a little bit about your own journey in terms of, did you find that for you personally, that was it just flowed that way? Or were you someone who really had to blaze a few trails just in terms of opening those doors and inviting this kind of thinking? Because I know for you, it's quite natural, but as you've identified, it's not for the federal government. They're not innovators. So how did you get to where you can influence these things, Darren?
Good question, Tova. I'll start by saying that it's not natural. It's a combination, I think, of hard work, attitude, confidence, and breaking down doors, you know, when necessary. You know, I started out at a time when there was no other managers. When I became a supervisor, for example, you know, the first time I was working for the Department of National Defense, and I found myself being a young man supervising older white males in what was called base supply. And there was a realization that there's nobody else out there like me doing what I'm doing. And, you know, I've got to set myself up as best as I can to succeed. Certainly ran into a lot of discrimination. It became commonplace, quite frankly, and it became part of doing business. You know, making personal strategies to overcome biases as part of everyday life. It's, you know, part of the survival mechanism, I think, that we, as, you know, minorities and other disproportionate populations face every day. I grew up really, I think I started my interest in diversity because as an older guy, and I'll tell you my age, I remember the death of Martin Luther King. And I remember, well, probably one of the first times I remember seeing my father cry, was during his death. So there is certainly a lot to be, a lot of influence, I think, from childhood experiences that go into who we are as individuals, as adults. And that's one that comes to mind for me. So it was a natural progression that when I had the opportunity, and I went back to school, then, I studied human resources from a textbook perspective, and understood the theories, right? What motivates people, and what doesn't motivate them or demotivates them, and I apply, I think, common practices that are really good for everybody, which by definition is inclusion.
Right.
It's about empathy and about creating expectations for yourself, as well as helping other individuals create goals for themselves. And that's what keeps people engaged in the workplace when they see opportunity, for example, to develop their own skill sets.
Also, when they see someone like yourself opening up those doors and they look and they go, okay, I see myself in a management position and I couldn't before. And as a result of this, I can believe this can happen for me too. So I just really wanted to slow it down and say, Darren, you have done a lot of that work and I know you do it very quietly. And I just wanted to acknowledge it because I think, especially in our province, we have work to do. And I want to make sure that we're acknowledging the work is being done every day on the ground to open up doors for all kinds of marginalized communities who in the past simply haven't been given those entryways. And from an HR perspective, it's very interesting to me because, some of those traditional HR strategies like screening out, really, you can't do that anymore if you're going to remove bias, if you're going to, remove marginalization, if you're going to engage all groups who learn many different ways how to do certain things. So I think it's so interesting, your HR background and how you've been able to not necessarily be brought down by that information, but actually empowered to figure out how we can make it work for everyone. So again, kudos on that piece. But
Thank you.
But Darren, in particular, because I am going to move us to what's happening right now, you've evolved to a point where right now the deputy minister has a lot of different directives in terms of inclusion. And I do believe some of it relates to the Accessible Canada Act and other acts that say it's time to really ensure that we do equalize the playing field for all our citizens. I think that should be the theme of her directives because that's really what she's saying. And I wondered if you could touch on what that is, because I can assure you the majority of people watching today don't know what I'm referring to. So maybe you could just walk us through even how we get those and where we are today with that information.
Well, it's interesting. It's a good conversation and a great segue. I think what I'm seeing from the inside is a groundswell of interest in how do we do it. In fact, we're working on, if I'll call it, an instructions manual, because often diversity comes like an IKEA piece of furniture in pieces, but they forgot to include the instructions.
That's right.
And so our managers need that support in order to basically deliver on our priorities as a department, and instructions around accommodation, instructions around accessibility are critical, and they're not universally understood. And so we've got to make sure that people understand, first of all, how to put aside my own biases, how to put aside my own fears and anxieties around hiring a person who's different than who I am, who has a different life experience than what I have, and fundamentally that's what we're endeavoring to do.
Darren, can that be done? And forgive me, but I have to say this: can that be done before people have the emotional intelligence to know that it's nothing personal having bias. It's conscious, it's unconscious, but it's there. And you know what I mean? It's sort of like, I don't like to say the word emotional intelligence often to people because they think I'm suggesting they're unintelligent, which is not.
Two different scales.
Right, totally. And I assure you, I do much better on the emotional intelligence scale than I do on the other one. But anyway, more importantly, yeah, you're right. But more importantly, I just want to say what we really need to say to people first and foremost, and I think I'm hearing, I just want to kind of zone in on it is, and I talk about it all the time, is if we can't acknowledge there is a bias, how do we even start the learning process and the engagement and the integration and the promotion and all those other incredible things that are coming out of those directives? So I'm jumping around a bit with you, but I can't help it because it's so fascinating.
A great point. I don't know if you're aware, I'm actually delivering unconscious bias training to our employees in our department. I'll have to invite you to attend one of our sessions.
Please, I would love to see.
Yeah, I'm the facilitator, so I get to decide who gets the invite.
Woo-hoo.
Right? But that's the key point there, and my session always includes this statement. I always say, we don't know what we don't know. So the purpose of the workshop is to get us to the point where we begin to recognize that there are things that we don't know, and including about ourselves. And that includes unconscious bias, and that we all have it, and that we all experience it. And it's all formed often from a very early stage of our life development, our sets of unconscious bias. And so, you're absolutely right. Our culture, if you will, organizational culture, is built on the collective behaviors of all of our managers and employees, working simultaneously towards particular goals, but doing it in such a way that either is inclusive or exclusive, often, of different groups of people for different reasons.
I hear you completely, because I just read a really fascinating report. You can look at the McKinsey report, or you can look at Harvard Business Report, and they all say the same thing. They say we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt the inclusion of diverse cultures, no matter who they are, is benefiting us. The creative problem solving, the less sick days, whatever it is, gratefulness. But what's fascinating to me is we know this, but this is where everyone's getting stuck, Darren. They're getting stuck in that doorway that narrows down, that says, now that you know that, what am I going to do about it? And so you're taking them from that place of saying, I know it's true, I should be more inclusive. I'm not trying to avoid it like I used to, but I have no flipping clue. I mean, I've been talking to folks in the public service of Canada, and all they ever want is those 2 or 3 things. Tell me those 3 things I got to do, Tova, so we can be inclusive and we can move on. And I have to tell you, Darren, I tell them, we need to go back to the value statement, because people think inclusion, whether of persons with disabilities, BIPOC population, is an add-on. And as an HR person, I know what I mean, because they have their little, this is what we do.
Right.
Whereas if we were to take it all the way back to value statements and say our value has changed and inclusion has become a major part of it, somehow it doesn't seem as add-on and extra work to people. And it's something I'm actually advising a lot of CEOs who ask me for that, like, where do we start kind of thing. What do you think, Darren? Where can we all get started, or what do we need to be doing that, maybe you would advise from your own experience that works?
Well, you're absolutely right. I think I don't think I could say it any better, Tova. The realities are that if we're going to impact our culture or create more inclusive culture, it really depends on each and every individual to make that happen. So, right now, for example, we're developing, putting pen to paper on our diversity action plan for the next 3 years. And the idea is to actually inspire people to take action, right? So the key word there is action. The middle word, is about that action. And our ability to do that will impact the results. quite frankly. And, how do we reach? We're an organization with almost 18,000 people all across Canada, 6 regions that we have head offices of, responsible for the Yukon and Northwest Territories as well. And we have remote locations for some of our staff.
So really, public service is, in a sense, a tipping point in Canada. And, with that kind of number, you really could be tipping, as I like to say, toward some of these things that we hope will happen, but don't always happen the way we thought. But right now, with that kind of heft behind you, I guess I'm saying, the ability to influence and communicate to these 18,000 employees, that really can sort of tip the scale towards a more open approach to inclusion. And that's very exciting to me. And one of the directives that I was really, frankly, interested in that I don't think we talk enough about is not just on the hiring side, which, by the way, I agree with you, we have to individualize and try to really identify. I call it just stay curious. Not what the hell's wrong with you curious. The kind of curious where you go, I don't know. Let's see, where your skill set lays, and having the time to be able to do that. But on a grand scale, like 18,000 people, is that even doable? But what I'm really interested in hearing about is the goals of promotion, because I think we've forgotten that we get people in the door. And yes, there's persons with disabilities and BIPOC community members and so on. But are they getting stuck? Are they getting promotions? And the studies show they're not. So I'm really interested, because part of what I understood through the directives also is not just to talk about getting people in the workplace, but really reminding and encouraging people that those good workers are ready to move to the next place, that we don't have enough management representation of our marginalized communities. And I wondered if you had any thoughts in terms of how these, the plan is much bigger and broader, but your own thought from the directives around promotion and the importance, and maybe some of the ways people who are watching today need to think about it, because we may have people watching who are doing the promoting, or we may have, likely both, people watching who would love to get a promotion. And I wonder, I wonder if you have any input or thoughts, or even, around the directives and how because they do touch on the importance of that.
That's a huge topic, Tova, but I'll try to be brief. One of the starting points with that conversation is I'll describe it as being all about the data. We do a lot of reports and analyze our workforce data. And we look at, for example, the number of employees who are in term positions, number of indeterminate employees, and we can break that data down by equity group as well, and as well as their classification, pay level, and so on. And we can begin to look at trends on who's being stuck, who's not moving up the career path, and who is. And in line with that, I think organizations need to put in place targeted talent management programs, or talent management related programs that provide a structured, or often unstructured, ways for individuals to thrive at their own pace and within their own interest level, if you will. So if I'm interested in being an executive, and not everybody is, a lot of work, a lot of hours to be a federal public service executive. If I was interested in that, what programs are available to me? And how do I tap into those programs? So we need to have those kinds of programs available to the people who desire them, right?
Absolutely.
So, in a menu of ways, sponsorships, mentoring programs, career learning opportunities, skill development opportunities, assignments, or promotional temporary assignments. We put a package together, if you will, that allows individuals to be promoted. Also, too, there's the French and English language, which is a huge barrier for many, many individuals. We're obliged under the Official Languages Act to be a bilingual workplace. In provinces or regions that are in fact bilingual, Atlantic Canada is considered a bilingual region because New Brunswick is a bilingual province. All right, so most of our senior leaders and managers have to be bilingual.
Interesting. So, what's interesting to me, though, is, I remember I was speaking with Madame Yasmin Laroche, Deputy Minister, and these were directives that came through her office. And she was the one who said to me, I feel as a public service, we haven't done a good job in that, not only hiring, but in the promotion. So I was No. All right. So for those of you watching, and notice that I have now a TV and a mirror behind me, I lost power with Zoom. I had to switch rooms. Darren has kindly stayed perfectly in position, so he looks absolutely seamless. God bless you. And Darren and I were, in fact, talking about Deputy Minister Madame Laroche's directives and discussions around the fact that public service needs to do better, and she acknowledges that it did not, and in fact did not engage enough of diverse populations. And really, that brings me to today, Darren, and really saying to you, that's where you come in, isn't it? Because you've made
you know what? I agree 100% with Madame Laroche. The public service in general, indeed the department that I work for, PSPC, that needs to do much better. We're actually seeing even larger gaps between what's described as the workforce availability and our own representation with respect to people with disabilities. The gap has increased, so which means we're going in the wrong direction. And some of it is a retention issue. A number of, I believe, of our self-identified persons with disabilities are of the older generation, that are retiring at a slightly higher rate than the average population.
Interesting.
But that's, the other issue is that our definition of what a person with disability has actually changed as well in the last 2 years, which rightfully so is inclusive of a lot of our more invisible disabilities, the mental health issues, the anxiety, and so on, learning disabilities, and other things that our own personal representation rates don't account for.
Right.
So when we look at our population, we're looking at the older definition and using that as the measuring tool to describe our representation. So we expect that once our systems catch up to the new realities, we'll close that gap somewhat. It's not going to close the gap completely because the gap is, quite frankly, too large.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is you don't stop trying to do something just because it's not going to completely change for you. You got to keep digging, and you kind of, as you well know, keep kicking those doors open and making it happen.
Yeah. I've always found in my experience, I've worked in this disability community, nonprofit community primarily for many years as well on boards, as I described earlier, and have worked with a lot of individuals like Tova, like yourself, and others who are in business of promoting, talent within the person with disabilities community. And there is still attitudinal barriers. There's no question that there's a tremendous amount of attitudinal barriers with respect to hiring persons with disabilities. I mentioned earlier that I do an unconscious bias workshop. In that workshop, we discuss a case, and the case talks about hiring a person with a disability. And, in that case, the manager has reservations, and we describe that as being a bias. And as a group, as a participant, you walk through it. And I always found when using that case study that people identify with it more than I want them to. And I wish that they did not, because it's a symptom of what we're dealing with.
The bigger issue, and it's huge.
Yeah. So it's an ongoing area of education, of self-reflection, and in some cases setting real hard targets and saying we shall do this. Yeah.
Darren, what I want to do is now get a little more in, because like I said, there was all these directives, and what was really interesting to me was how the deputy minister kind of asked different people to really focus on some of them they feel that they can chip away at, make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was actually pretty innovative for government to go that route. What for you were some of the directives that you felt you could chip away at? If you're able to share those with me, or if you're still too early on for that, let me know. But
it's not too early on, and I don't have our list of
no, but just a sense of what.
Me, but from what I've been working on, we have an objective to make sure that all of our senior executives are provided unconscious bias and anti-racism training. In our department, we have about 400 to 500 top executives. And we think, it needs to start with that group. Our next level of reach, if you will be the manager level.
I've always said you have to start at the top, because otherwise people do not value the work if they see that everyone's doing it but the top. So I really want to honor you for doing that.
Yeah. So we'll be facilitating workshops and asking the tough questions. What are you personally doing to overcome your own biases, and what are you doing to promote diversity and inclusion within the broad range of your personal area of accountability and responsibility? So the idea is to really create a wake-up call within that influential group.
That upper management.
The upper group. It's where the air is very thin sometimes.
I'm told.
I'm told as well.
That's right. Well, more importantly, I think that as long as there's people like you who really are continuing not just to blaze the trail and then settle in, but continuing to open those doors and continuing to influence the discussion, I know we're all better off, because as I said, there's influence that coming from the top down, meaning the federal government, that's sending messages to private industry, to all of us, NGOs, everyone, and saying, what are you doing? And we want to not only know about it, but we want to make sure you're really doing it. And I think that's just right. Very empowering for those of us who've been kind of banging away, but not sure what's happening above us. You know what I mean? So I think you represent such a wonderful segue between where some of us feel like we are, where we could be in terms of the influencing of these directives and how they're applied. And I know that, again, you being modest, you won't say it, but I think it's so important that you're one of the people who is influencing that discussion.
Well, so I do that, and I do it strategically. I do it behind the scenes somewhat, but I will say that the deputy minister commitments have created a lot of buzz within all federal departments. I get a lot of calls and inquiries from other government departments. They hear my name and they're reaching out to say, can you help us with what we're trying to do? So that's encouraging. And within our own department, there is a sense of urgency that we have to, get moving on some of the things that we've committed to.
Tell me the obvious, though, Darren. How has COVID affected that? Because here we are now. We're in year 2 of COVID, and I know I've been only talked to you in your living room for the last year and a half, but more importantly, because some people work better at home, how has COVID affected the timelines? Are they being looked at and shifted because people feel that government has to be given more time under these unique circumstances, or is that not a discussion that's being had at this time?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's almost the reverse. I think the advent of MS Teams and Zoom has created sort of a real-time crunch. What I mean by that is it's a more the higher expectation of instant solutions, because they can instantly contact you and see you face to face, as opposed to having to book a meeting and find an available boardroom next week.
Yeah,
Right?
some of us don't know what that's like, but I know from a public service perspective, that's a very daily issue. So
It
I
was a
respect
daily
that.
issue in the public to be able to book a boardroom in which to have a meeting, right? And so often the meeting would be held off simply because there was no room available that was good for everybody.
Never thought of it.
And now, yeah, now we're like instant coffee. We're meeting, right, virtually. So I think that's created some pressure, if you will, on and squashed some expectational timelines on some of the projects that we're working on. On the positive side, working from home, I think, is going to be here to stay. I don't see it being something that's ever going to go back to the way it was before COVID. It really is our new normal. And, you know, people may choose to go into the office for certain days of the week. Others may choose to work almost 100% of the time at home. I think it's a great accommodation strategy for certain people with disabilities, if they have mobility disabilities, for example, or if they need attendant care or other supports. Being able to work from home as an option can only be seen as a positive.
I agree. Even COVID has a silver lining, and I don't mean to be flippant, but there has been benefits.
I do think, you know, and even for other types of community recruiting, for example, Indigenous people who often live in remote areas, providing they have good internet access, now have access to jobs that they wouldn't have access to in the past.
And I think that's really powerful as well. So from the top down and from the bottom up, in a sense, and that's no offense to anyone, it's reality. What I'm seeing, Darren, is you're continuing to affect from your public service perch, but also as a person who is a member of our community. And I think our community is very lucky to have you.
Thank you very much.
Was there anything I should have asked you I didn't ask, or did I do okay? Or I've known you so long.
I think you did great. I think you did great.
Other than the little room switch, we're doing great. So I want
to thank you. The room switch kind of threw me off. Like, what is this? Like, what?
It's always a story with me, Darren. You know that.
I know that.
I'm like a whirling dervish. Is that what they call it? Where you just like the Tasmanian devil?
Yeah. The hurricane following you. Yes.
The sooner this third wave is over, you and I can go to the old triangle for lunch, the better is what I say.
That would be great.
Right. And I thank you so much. National Accessibility Week needs more people just like you, both
happy National Accessibility Week to everyone. You know, it takes more than 1 week, I think, to make a difference. But nonetheless, this is an important week that we need to reflect on.
Agreed. And if you ever need a speaker, you know, I'm an influencer. I'd love to get into those 400. But in the meantime, consider me if you need me, okay?
I have been considering you, and we may, in fact, touch base.
All right. That sounds like a promise, by the way. Anyway, I want to thank you again, Darren Ruck, on behalf of Tova Talks and all of us at reachAbility. Just keep up the good work. It's folks like you that make the difference. So bye for now.
Take care.
Bye now.